Nil Singh immigrated himself, but legally from Fiji.
The Newman police chief broke down as he talked about Officer Singh.
His 5-month-old, he will never hear talk. He will never see his son walk. He doesn't get to hold that little boy, hug his wife, say goodnight anymore because a coward took his life.
On Wednesday, Officer Singh pulled over a grey pickup truck that had no license plates. Minutes later, he radioed, "Shots fired. I've been hit."
Fox's Jonathan Hunt. President Trump tweeted about the manhunt, saying it's another reason we need a wall with Mexico. Tweeting Thursday, "Time to get tough on border security. Build the wall." Well, money for the wall is the sticking point that's keeping the government in a partial shutdown, now in its 7th day.
If this stretches into January, you can imagine there being protests. You can imagine there being the phone lines lighting up at the Capitol, members being yelled at the hallways by federal workers who haven't gotten a paycheck in a long time. It's kind of easy right now for members to be inured to what's going on, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, because there's not a lot of impact at this moment of how it's affecting the federal government, and certainly the 800,000 people who work for the federal government who aren't getting paychecks right now. That's key. That will change if this drifts deeper into January.
That is Fox's Chad Pergram on Capitol Hill. This is Fox News.
Whether you love history, nature, scenery, or good food, Jeff's Pirates Cove is the place to be. Originally established as Pirates Cove in 1953, it's the oldest remaining beach bar and restaurant in Guam. Located on Guam's rugged southeast coast, visitors for years have discovered the natural beauty wrapped in deep history. Come out and walk the entire 22-acre site. Stop by the Seaside Museum for a taste of local history and experience Jose's international menu with open-air dining. Stop by and see what you've been missing. Jeff's Pirates Cove in historic Ipan Talafofo.
A medical investigator in New Mexico says the 8-year-old migrant boy who died in U.S. custody had the flu. He's the second child from Guatemala to die recently in custody. Doctors and politicians have raised questions about the medical care the children are receiving, and Washington has ordered changes to procedures.
The DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen ordered a top-to-bottom review of agency's medical screening procedures. She ordered medical exams for every child currently in custody. She asked the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, to help identify possible viruses that may have contributed to their death and why so many arriving Central Americans are needing hospital care.
Fox's William LaJeunesse. House Democratic leaders say they will investigate the children's deaths. A former employee suing Disney Cruise Line, saying the company discriminated against him because he's a man and over 40.
Anthony McHugh filed a lawsuit in federal court in Florida claiming that his younger female manager at Disney Cruise Line created a hostile work environment because of his gender and age. The former labor analyst says the unidentified supervisor bullied him about his age, bragged about sexual conquest with married men in the office, and passed him over for promotions even though he was more senior and qualified. McHugh's attorney would not get into specifics about a unique harassment case given the genders of the employee and supervisor. Disney Cruise Line said in a statement that the claims in the lawsuit are without merit, adding, quote, "We will respond to them in court." Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
An explosion surprises New Yorkers Thursday night. Fox's Anna Eliopoulos saw it from a restaurant in Queens.
The sky was lit up like it was the 4th of July, blue and white colors flashing over and over and over again, and it didn't stop for what I would assume is about 2 minutes' time.
A transformer exploded at a Con Ed plant in Astoria, Queens, disrupting power in the area for a short time and flights at LaGuardia Airport. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Here at APL, our core values give the company its heart and soul. Whether it's connecting your business with our global network through our newly enhanced service or investing our efforts into giving back to the community, APL is committed to serving you. We humbly honor the opportunity to find innovative solutions for you and your business. To learn more about our enhanced service, call 588-4651 or visit www.apl.com/Guam for more details.
Chili's 3 for Me menu just got bigger. We're giving you more choices for the same great price. For just $15, you can get a beverage, salad, and an entree. First, choose from a refreshing Coca-Cola, iced tea, or Heineken on draft. Then enjoy a house salad and select your choice of a mouth-watering entree, like our half-rack ribs, Cajun chicken pasta, old-timer burger, personal chicken fajitas, or the flavorful margarita flatbread. So hurry in today and enjoy our Chili's 3 for Me menu for just $15. Available for a limited time. Chili's, more life happens here.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Slamming that book down. What's the name of that book? The United States Constitution. It's a book that we read every day here on Tall Tales. We are proud provenders and defenders of the Constitution of the United States, the Second Amendment being part of that. We start out every day with the Second Amendment. I'm not going to spend much time today picking on Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia, who perhaps was dyslexic, because when it came time for him to interpret, to write a majority opinion for the United States Supreme Court interpreting the Second Amendment, he couldn't read the word militia, and he did it twice. But nonetheless, when it was all over, the United States Supreme Court said that every person has a right to keep a firearm, an individual, personal, constitutional right to keep a firearm in his home for protection. So that's the law, and we're going to stick with it. So the first item on our agenda here today, right after the Second Amendment, is something that causes the real Joe Cruz to play the very popular theme song from Meet the Press. And in our own version of Meet the Press, what do we call it here on Tall Tales?
Zemi-i-Kutni.
Zemi-i-Kutni. It's my backwards, bilingual, tongue-in-cheek play on words for Meet the Press. And what we do here is we examine, actually post-mortem, I suppose would be more like it, the editorials from each of the daily newspapers, and if one of them is edgy, hard-hitting, topical, and happens to please the reader, it would get marked up with the coveted blue star. I have my blue pencil right here. On the other hand, yesterday we had an editorial that got an F because it very nicely laid a foundation and popped a question up on the skyline and then chickened out instead of answering that question. That's not exactly the opposite of what we're looking for here. So yesterday, that editorial, it was, let's see, yesterday it was the Post. The Post got an F. And I don't like to give Fs. Most teachers don't like to give Fs. They like to think that their students are successful, and it's much more fun to hand out an A than an F. But if you got to do it, you got to do it. And yesterday I had to do it. Okay, well, today's editorials are not exactly what you'd call stem winders. but we'll take a crack at them here. Let's start out with the daily news. And the subject is volunteer your time. While most of the island is midway through a season of celebration, the Guam Homeless Coalition is gearing up for one of the most important undertakings of the year, the annual point-in-time homeless count. It's an effort worth supporting, and those who can help should consider volunteering. Each year, volunteers in every state and territory take to the streets, alleys, beaches, and parks throughout the United States to count people who have no place to live or are living in places not meant for human habitation. In 2019, the count will take place on Friday, January 25, and the coalition is looking for volunteers. The volunteers just don't count the homeless. They collect information that help officials determine what services are needed in the community. They find out how many of the homeless are veterans or children or living in families. Officials use the information to make decisions about what kinds of programs, such as mental health services or substance abuse treatment, can be put in place to reduce or eliminate homelessness. The Guam Homeless Coalition wants to recruit 150 additional volunteers for the 2019 count. Volunteers can start well before sunrise and work let into the night. It probably means late into the night. So this is something that would make you happy if you're a volunteer. You can start before sunrise and you can work well into the night. If that isn't a come on, I haven't heard one. Their efforts will help the community for years to come. Volunteer enumerators must be at least 18, and they have to attend a mandatory one-day training session. The session covers various topics, including safety, communication, and logistics. A separate mandatory one-day training session will be held for volunteers with prior experience conducting the count. First-time volunteers can attend the sessions from 8 a.m. till 2 p.m., January 16, 17, and 18 at Catholic Social Services Conference Room in Barrigada. Returning volunteers are those with previous experience taking part in a point-in-time homeless count will have a mandatory training session from 8 a.m. to noon on January 15. That session will also be held at Catholic Social Services Conference Room. And then there's some phone numbers and other contact information here. Well, once again, we see what is actually a public service announcement dressed up to look like an editorial. I suppose writing this is easier than actually writing an editorial or doing what the Daily News yesterday, taking one from the USA Today editorial board and running it on the editorial page. Then we go to the Post. These guys are really, I wonder if there's an antitrust violation here, an editorial fixing violation. This is the Post. Let's continue to help the homeless after the holidays. During the holiday season, there's an outpouring of sympathy towards homeless people who are sometimes regarded with suspicion. We hope that island residents continue to be concerned about the plight of the homeless after New Year's celebrations. Although much progress is being made to help Guam's homeless population, more needs to be done to help individuals and families who don't have a safe and secure shelter. We also need to do more to prevent individuals and families from losing their homes. It's important to regularly gather information about these individuals and families to effectively manage programs and services as the homeless population changes. That's why the annual homeless count is important. The Guam Homeless Coalition will hold its next point-in-time homeless count on January 25, 2019. And you know, these guys could have run this. They could have run the one editorial twice and used it in both papers. Saved a little time and energy, right? Except for the punchline here on the Post. The survey is important for understanding the downward spiral into hopelessness. Because the homeless population is diverse, officials should stay up to date on the contributing factors that range from drug addiction to mental illness. We look forward to hearing more from officials about the plan for the overnight homeless shelter that the Calvo Tenorio administration announced in 2017. As community members, we can help not only by volunteering for the homeless count, but also by donating items to local charities that help homeless people. If we all work together on short-term assistance and long-term support, we can ensure that homeless officials are not shut out of our community. Well, there's not going to be a blue star today. No, not even close. But there will be some comment here. These two editorials do cause me to want to talk a little bit about homelessness. We go through this every year. We do this count, and we do a lot of hand-wringing about the homeless. And as we drive about the island, we see panhandlers out on the safety islands with plastic bottles soliciting donations, etc. You see people living in fiesta shelters, etc. So how, if the collective intelligence of the Tall Tales Nation international listening audience were to set its minds to solving the homeless problem, could we do it? I can't think of a more intelligent group to lend its hand to that. How would we go about doing it? My suspicion is this, that if you were to round up every single homeless person on the island today and take them to Dedido and find enough houses, one way or another, vacant houses, to house them all properly, in about a year or two, you'd be back out on the streets counting the homeless. That's a pretty cynical, sardonic, sarcastic way of looking at things. But I don't see it as so much as a homelessness problem as a people problem. So I'd certainly hope that our international radio listening audience and our Facebookers International here can chime in on this. But I think there are several reasons that people are living on the well, let's define terms here. Living on the streets. If you are living in a fiesta shelter or living in your car or something like that, you're homeless. If you're out in the boonies somewhere in a building made with a tin roof and 2x4s and etc., and you've got an extension cord that goes from your house to your neighbor's house, and you carry your water back and forth in 5-gallon jugs, and you got a slit trench out in the jungle somewhere. You have a roof over your head at night. You have a bed to sleep in, etc. But when they go out and do the count, you are still homeless because you're not living in, I can't remember which one of the editorials, but I think it was the first one, had a term of art there. Yeah, I can't find it, but thanks for the help, Real Joe Cruz. A term used to describe something that is not really a habitable dwelling. It's kind of like what I described, tin roof, 2x4s, no actual source of power, etc. Keeps the rain off you, perhaps, keeps the wind out, and it would be the place that the dwellers call home, but they would still be counted as homeless. Well, let's just, for the purposes of discussion, put those folks aside for the moment. Not that it's not an important problem, but let's just talk about people that are sleeping in fiesta shelters or cars or on top of a newspaper down on the beach or wherever. what is the reason what are reasons that people find themselves in that situation, or that we find them in that situation? Well, I can't say that I know. I can speculate a little bit, and that's kind of what we do here on Tall Tales, a little speculation. One of the problems, one of the things that happens is this: since 1975, a person who is, as an example, schizophrenic cannot be involuntarily medicated. So a person who lives in his own world of hallucinations and visions, or whatever you want to say, who could perhaps be brought back to the straight and narrow if he were medicated, cannot be medicated unless a court orders that he be medicated, because he is a danger either to himself or to someone else. So I know in the big cities, a lot of the folks living out on the streets fall into that category. They are people with mental illnesses that cannot be medicated, and so they're basically attempting to survive out on the street. I suspect that some of our homeless on island fall into that same category. A second group of people are people who have made some incredibly bad personal choices. Things like gambling away their money, or perhaps hooking up with the wrong person and being conned out of their money, or being married to or living with the wrong person, etc., and finding themselves literally and figuratively out in the cold. There are people who are addicting to dangerous drugs, who do nothing, who spend their whole life doing nothing except getting the drugs and then using the drugs, and don't much care where it is that they're living, so long as they can get and use those drugs. So those are three categories. I suspect, but I don't know, that you'd have a hard time finding someone who's living on the streets who at one time owned a home and was unable to continue to pay for his home and wound up in a mortgage foreclosure where the lender foreclosed on his mortgage and sold the house, and the person, the mortgagor, had to move out of the house and move out onto the streets. I suspect that almost never, ever happens. There are, and probably one other category, people who are estranged from their families for one reason or another. And then, of course, the age plays into it, too. I suspect that if you were to examine the ages of some of the categories of the homeless, so if this survey does anything, I would hope that it would answer some of the at least numerical questions that I've been posing here. Who are these people, and why are they out on the street? And once you found that out, then maybe you could devise some kinds of a means to provide homes for the homeless people. But as I said earlier, I have a feeling that if every one of the people that counts as homeless right now were given a house today, in a year or two, we'd be right out there counting those same folks, because they'd be right back on the street. Now, of course, income has something to do with it. Houses ain't free. And if you got a house, if you have a place to stay, you got to pay for it. And I learned when I went to, let's see, it was something put on by, the Chamber of Commerce's economic survey. I found out that there are basically three tiers of rentals. There's the top tier from, say, $2,200 up. That's people who are fortunate enough to rent to people in the military who receive a housing allowance and can afford the high rentals. There is the government subsidized rental, the so-called Section 8 rental, $1,200 to $1,400 or so. And then there's the local rental down around 1,000 or below. And it doesn't go much higher than that, because anybody who can scrape together that kind of money, say $1,000 every month, oftentimes figures out a way to buy a house instead of renting. The most desirable, of course, rentals are the top tier, the military renters. The least desirable are the Section 8, because according to what we learned at that forum, the Section 8 renters are extremely hard on the rental properties, thereby cutting into the landlord's profits. And landlords, of course, like anybody else, have money invested, and they like to see a return on their investment. Landlords are not landlords because they are really good-hearted people and want to provide cheap places for people to live. At least none that I've ever seen. Perhaps they're out there somewhere. So, taking all that into consideration then, does it make any sense to try to make it a little easier to be a homeless person? This is kind of a big one, and this is one that you're gonna say, what are you talking about, Bob? But let's say that you are a person that lives in a fiesta shelter somewhere. Well, like everybody else, you'd probably like to take a shower once in a while. And maybe you'd like to have a safe place to keep your stuff. If you notice, a lot of the homeless folks are dragging around plastic bags with all their belongings in them, etc. You see an occasional shopping cart used as a place for storing a person's goods. So would it make any sense at all to establish several locations where a person who was homeless could get a hold of a locker that he could lock, so he could put his stuff in that locker, and so that he could take a shower on a day, or on a daily or a couple of times a week basis or something like that? I suspect, but don't know, that there may be people who are homeless that would really like to go to apply for a job, but really have a difficult time making themselves presentable enough so that a prospective employer would say, yeah, maybe I could hire that guy. And that kind of ties into a bath, a shower, clothes, how you look, etc. And it must be very difficult for people to maintain their appearance when they don't have a place to store their gear, etc. So to me, that makes a certain amount of sense. Now, I take some of my own experience here, doing a lot of traveling. A lot of times when you travel, you're kind of stuck in between planes or trains or buses or whatever. And most of my life, I've been a runner. So when I find myself in a situation like that, I like to go running. Carry my running gear in a bag, always have a padlock with me. It's not that hard in a lot of the cities to find a place where you could go inside, put your stuff in a locker, lock it up tight, go running, come back from your run, take a shower, get your clothes out of the locker, and go on about your business. That really beats the heck out of renting a room just to accomplish those simple details. So I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it is, in fact, an idea, and I think it probably is a better idea than going through the annual wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth talking about the homeless. Okay, well, we've talked enough about the homeless. Listen a little to Dave Brubeck here for a minute, and then come back, and we'll go to the card.
John Gibson, digging up history. McDonald's uses them for French fries, but in World War II, American sailors used them to sink a Japanese sub. That story after this. Let's talk heirloom sheets and towels from Redland Cotton in Alabama. First, the family farm, growing the finest cotton in the world. The spinning, the looming, every step made in America, right down to the cutting and sewing. Sheets designed from a long-lost 1920s weave. The softest, most comfortable, longest-lasting sheets you've ever slept on. The Redland family, dedicated to America and linens you'll treasure. Check out redlandcotton.com for America's linen. redlandcotton.com. Back to my story. It was nighttime, and the USS destroyer O'Bannon came across a Japanese submarine on the surface, its deckside sentries asleep. But the O'Bannon found itself too close to use its deck guns, and the Japanese sentries, awake, were rushing to their guns. Ordered to distract any way possible, the U.S. sailors started throwing things on deck that were handy. The Japanese thought these things were grenades and rushed to toss them overboard. Now the O'Bannon got far enough away, it was able to open fire and sank the Japanese sub. The first time in U.S. naval history, credit for saving our ship and sinking another went to sailors throwing potatoes at the enemy. I'm John Gibson, digging up history.
For over 30 years, Sanford Technology Group has been helping companies throughout Guam and Micronesia with their payroll, time and attendance, networking, and other information technology services. Our online integrated payroll and time and attendance solution provides the workforce management tools and expertise to make your business more efficient and employee-friendly. For more information, visit Sanford Technology at 335 South Marine Corps Drive or call us at 647-0220 to schedule a demo today.
Because I just signed up for a 12-month iConnect plan, I'm automatically entered into iConnect's Connect and Win giveaway. iConnect is giving away a trip for two to Manila with a stay at the new Holiday Inn Express. They'll also be giving away an Apple Watch, Apple TV, more Mabuhay miles, Fitbits, and Beyond the Box gift cards. Go to iConnectGuam.com for details or call 888-8888 to learn how you can connect and win with iConnect.
Conditions apply. Jeff's Pirates Cove, open daily at 8 a.m. and serving up hot breakfast with endless coffee and a taste of history.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Yeah, well, here we are. We've got a card today. As I've mentioned on more than one occasion, the card is pretty thin right now because of the holiday season. We don't have the kind of political fisticuffs that we're ordinarily accustomed to. People are too busy being kind to one another and putting away their political spurs so that we don't have the same rambunctious cards that we ordinarily have. So I'm going to make the best of what I got here. On the card today, of course, we start out with that law lecture, and then we go to Governor-elect Lou Leon Guerrero versus the Tall Tales political intel line. And then after that, we've got Bob versus Tom Adda's Committee on Land. And then Senator Fernando Esteves versus the Attorney General. And then the United Nations versus the USN versus the United States Navy. And then we get into socialism versus freedom, left versus right, the left versus America with Tom Perez. And matters such as that which we've been talking about for the last couple days, and we'll spend some more time talking about it today. So we start out with the law lecture, and we spent a lot of time talking about the laws of Guam and the national law and the Constitution, and I just think it's helpful that our international radio listening audience be exposed to the laws of some of the states. So yesterday we wrapped up with Michigan, where we found out that under state law, dentists are officially classified as mechanics. And then we go to Minnesota and Mississippi. In Minnesota, women may face up to 30 days in jail if they impersonate Santa Claus. Talk about sexist. Is Santa Claus a man, real Joe Cruz?
I'm not sure. I never looked, sir.
Okay. All right. All right. In Minnesota, in Minneapolis, double parkers can be put on a chain gang. Serves them right. You know, if you can't find a parking place, go somewhere else. Just don't double park out there in the street. And in Brainerd, Minnesota, every man in Brainerd is required by law to grow a beard. Is Ray Gibson from Brainerd, Minnesota?
Possibly, sir. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's from Brainerd, but if he were to go to Brainerd, he would pass without objection. Okay. And in Minnesota, it's illegal to tease skunks. Now, that's probably something that I would have never thought of on my own. I would never think that it would be a whole lot of fun to tease skunks. I have a feeling the skunks wouldn't get much enjoyment from it either. Then we go to Mississippi. Only three laws in Mississippi here. In Mississippi, it is legal to kill one's servant. Wow. That's tough. And in Truro, Mississippi, a would-be groom must, quote, prove himself manly, close quote, prior to marriage by hunting and killing either 6 blackbirds or 3 crows. If you can't go out and kill 6 blackbirds or 3 crows, I guess you can't get married in Truro, Mississippi. Okay, well, sometimes we get down a little bit on our legislature, so it's kind of nice to see how the other half lives. Okay, the first item on the card here is the Lujan Guerrero, Governor-elect Lujan Guerrero, versus the Tall Tales political intel line. And the incoming Leon Guerrero Tenorio administration announced several appointments for public safety agencies, including a deputy director position that is currently barred in the fiscal year 2019 budget law. The transition committee for Governor-elect Leon Guerrero and Governor-elect Joshua Tenorio, I'm just going to call them Lou and Josh from now on. I think we all know what their titles are, has assessed the necessity to appoint deputy directors to certain agencies to achieve its mission and objectives in the executive branch, said Deputy Chief of Staff John Jr. Calvo. A legal opinion from Attorney General Elizabeth Barrett Anderson is expected on the removal of the deputy director positions, which was one of the concerns raised with Public Law 34-116. Barrett Anderson has already opined that the hiring freeze provision violates the separation of powers doctrine as well as the Organic Act of Guam. The AG, in her opinion, wrote that the legislature appropriates funds to each executive department and agency, but when the legislature mandates how the funds are to be spent, it encroaches on the governor's administrative authority. The same finding was made on the budget law's restrictions on promotions. The legislature may not set conditions to an appropriation which impinge on the executive power to allocate staff and resources, Barrett Anderson wrote. Therefore, we opine that the prohibitions against promoting employees violates the separation of powers doctrine and therefore is inorganic and unenforceable. The AG has yet to address the freeze on pay raises, salary increments, and deputy director positions. The Leon Guerrero Tenorio administration is confident that the Organic Act vests the governor the statutory authority to use her discretion to make cabinet appointments in the best interests of ensuring government operations and prioritizing the importance of executive leadership at various departments, the Transition Committee announced in a release. So we're going to start right out here. with the Leon Guerrero administration spending some money on deputy directors, even though there's perfect cover for her not to. All she needs to do is say, sorry, folks, but I'm not going to appoint deputy directors because of the budget law. Not so. So we'll see how that one turns out. And then we get into the appointments. And the reason that this is called LG versus the TTPIL, the Tall Tales Political Intel line, is that we'll match her appointments against what was predicted several days ago in the Tall Tales Political Intel line. And my quick run through it looks like she's pretty much right on point. So Captain Steve Ignacio was appointed the chief of police. Isn't that what we said, Real Joe Cruz?
That's correct, sir. I'm starting to believe that you've been choosing all the directors.
Well, And then we had Ike Pareto was tapped as the new director of customs and quarantine. We didn't pick Ike, did we?
No, sir.
Yeah. But we didn't pick Ike, but I will say this, given my background in political studies, I like Ike. At least I did in 1952. General Dwight David Eisenhower, I like Ike, okay. And then we've got Samantha Brennan was appointed director of the Department of Corrections. Okay, and it took us a while. We got the first name quite early, right, Brennan?
Actually, we got the last name, Brennan.
Right.
We weren't sure about the first name.
And we picked that up yesterday, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, here's a little correction for you folks on the transition team that are listening. Samantha Brennan was not appointed the director of the Department of Corrections. She was appointed the director of corrections. Everybody gets this wrong. The director, there is a director of land management. There is no director of the Department of Land Management. If you feel the burn, then you're looking at the director of administration, not the director of the Department of Administration. But I suspect it's one of those things that gets repeated. The mistake or the error is repeated so often that people must think it, well, it must be right because that's what everybody says. But it ain't. You take a look at Title V where there's a list of government departments, government directors, and it's Director of Corrections. So I'll come back to this, but I will say now I have never, ever in my life been the director of the Department of Corrections. I was the director of corrections once, so. Okay, so Samantha Brennan. And we got Joey Terlahi, deputy director of DOC. Right on, right?
That was correct, sir.
Yeah, so Joey Terlahi is actually the deputy director of corrections. Although there's something to be said about the Attorney General's opinion there. And then we've got Tim Uggan as the Homeland Security Advisor. This is something that the Tall Tales Political Intel line did not pick up. So I suspect the line is still up and still transmitting, so we'll probably have more of the incoming administration. We'll probably know who they are before the incoming governor-elect knows. Right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Says we beat her to the punch on most of these already. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Director of Corrections. Not the Director of the Department of Corrections, but the Director of Corrections is Samantha Brennan, who just retired as the Chief Probation Officer. Senator Talina Nelson was able to get a couple of bills through the legislature dealing with the position of the Director of Corrections and the Director of Customs. And she put in some pretty stringent requirements, educational experience requirements. In fact, the requirements for the position of Director of Corrections are stringent enough that were I to want, throw my hat into that ring, I would not be qualified to be the Director of Corrections. And I suspect there's a few folks out there saying, well, yeah, that figures. But I was a Director of Corrections once upon a time, and I'm going to opine upon what I think is involved in that job and what it takes to be a successful director of corrections. And I will also perhaps even take a shot at determining whether or not Samantha Brennan is going to be a successful director of corrections. I think the outgoing director of corrections, Tony LaMorena, has to be marked as an unsuccessful director of corrections. But here's what it's like to be the director of corrections. In a lot of ways, it's like being the king of a small country. You have a number of subjects in your small country. They're not citizens. They don't have the rights of citizens. They're subjects. And as their king, you are responsible for every bit of their lives, for their food, for their medicine, for their care, for their shelter, for their clothing, for their social well-being, for their education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more than just being the president of a small country. It's more like being the king of a small country. And as the king of a small country, you have your own army, the corrections officers and the detention officers, whose job it is to help you maintain order in that small country known as DEPCOR. That army may or may not perform well, and their performance is in some part dependent upon you. You're not going to be, at least you shouldn't perform like a corrections officer if you are the director of corrections. I remember the first day that Tony LaMorena was appointed director of corrections, and he appeared on TV wearing a costume. The costume he was wearing looked just exactly like the uniform of a corrections officer. Well, if you haven't been to the corrections academy and if you haven't stood a post, then you shouldn't be running around in a corrections officer's uniform. The operation of the correctional facility is primarily addressed by the corrections officer. The director's job is to set the appropriate tone. And by that I mean this. It perhaps doesn't occur to most folks, but being a corrections officer is maybe the hardest job on the island and maybe the most dangerous. A cop on the beat downtown on a Saturday night might run into 2 or 3 bad people during his shift. Potential criminals, people who would do bad things if the opportunity presented itself. Everybody in the Department of Corrections fits into that category. They're all there because they did something bad at one time in the not so recent past. Cops on the beat don't usually have to deal with too many con men. But when it comes to the Department of Corrections, the Department of Corrections is the largest agglomeration of con men anywhere in this part of the Pacific. Now I'll come back to this and take this up to that big halftime show we have every day at 5 o'clock.
Family Finance has been serving the people of Guam since 1959, and they'll continue to be there for you in the years to come. Whether you're looking to get a personal loan for that summer vacation or paying off those long overdue bills, Family Finance has got you covered. Apply for a personal loan from $1,000 up to $3,500 by calling Family Finance in Hagåtña at 475-4545, Upper Tuon 647-5626, or in Dededo 633-4473. Family Finance has been serving the people of Guam since 1959.
Today, Tritons. This is Chelsea Ting, Communications Officer with Bank of Guam and proud alumna of the University of Guam, class of 2015. I made some of the best memories during my time as a Triton, but I also remember that it wasn't easy to pay for everything that I needed to graduate on time. I have committed to giving back through the G is for Giving campaign, which will help student scholarships, programs, and activities, and I encourage you to do the same. To make a tax-deductible donation, log on to supportuog.org by December 31st or call 735-2975 for more information.
Viva UOG!
So that's the environment that corrections officers live in all their working lives. And on an hour-by-hour basis, corrections officers probably spend more time with inmates in the department at DEPCOR than they do with their own families. And it's very important that the director emphasize that the corrections officer's job is not to do anybody any favors. That group of con men will go out of its way to con you into doing something where you compromise yourself if you're a corrections officer. And once you cross that threshold, it's really hard to get back. That's the kind of leadership that the director needs to provide. As far as the other things that the director must be able to do, the director has to be some kind of a manager, because you have a budget. You don't have unlimited funds. Managing overtime is critical. You have to buy food for the inmates, etc. So some sort of a financial sense is really important. The ability to deal with the budgetary process at both the governor's office, with the gnomes of BBMR, and with the legislature is very important. The director also needs to have a sense of public relations, because if things go awry at the Department of Corrections, the director is the first person that the media is going to come looking for. And a director's success oftentimes is measured by his ability to deal with the media, especially in times of stress. So that's another thing that falls on the in the director's lap. Director has to have the ability to deal with other parts of the government, the utilities, the Department of Administration, et cetera, et cetera. So a certain amount of, I suppose, diplomacy and a sense of how the government operates, where the levers and buttons are, and how to push those buttons and pull the levers to get the DEPCOR the resources that it needs to accomplish its mission. So that's an awful lot of stuff that you're looking for from one person. Now, Senator Nelson's bill really couches it all towards law enforcement experience. And I'm going to say this, that probably the least desirable result would be for someone to work his way up through the corrections officer's chain of command to the point that he is the director. Because the corrections officers are an essential part of the department, but as you might gather, they're not the only part. And you could be the best corrections officer in the place and fall short on many of the other things that the director has to do. So my sense is that a director of corrections, in order to be effective, has to know stuff. He has to have some formal education. So if there are formal education requirements, that's good. And when I say formal education, I don't mean criminal justice. I mean a little bit broader range of education than that. The director of corrections needs to have some experience. He needs to have some years, what we would refer to as figuratively as gray hair. You could get a dye job and that would be okay. When I say gray hair, I mean the kind of experience that comes with a certain amount of age. I suppose it would be possible for someone who's 30 years old to be a good director of corrections. I think the odds against it are highly unlikely. I don't see that the position is one that requires a male. I think a female could do a good job as director of corrections if all of the things that I've just mentioned here are things that are available to that particular person. Well, then she could probably be a good, or excuse me, I got to get it right here, don't I? They could be a good director of corrections. So Samantha Brennan came up through the probation office, as I understand it. Well, we'll have to see. That is narrow. There isn't much breadth in probation. Other than that, I don't know that much about Samantha Brennan, but it would seem that a breadth of experience might stand a person in better position to be an effective director of corrections. I could be wrong on that, and I'm really willing to keep my fingers crossed and wish Samantha Brennan the very best, because that is one of the most important jobs in the government of Guam, and I hope she is successful in her pursuit of that particular job. And once again, I'm still fighting this same cough, so I heard somebody this morning talking about the cough show with a little tall tales in between, and that's how it seems sometimes. And as I've cautioned you before, I will try not to cough into the microphone, but in case that I do, don't get too close to the speaker on your phone or your iPad or your radio. I wouldn't want you to catch any of the germs blowing out of that speaker that I've blown into the microphone. So a word to the wise. So other than gloating about how successful the Tall Tales political intel line was in identifying those executive picks, and my opining a little bit about the position of Director of Corrections and giving the current nominee what I hope is a good send-off, I think that's about all we have to say about that item on the card. So from there, we go to Bob versus Tom Atta's Committee on Land, which met this morning. And committee met at about 9 o'clock this morning, and the advertisement for the committee meeting was that Tom Atta's committee was going to brief everyone about some Chamorro Land Trust resolutions and some pending legislation, etc. I thought it was just going to be a listening session. So I've been following this very, very carefully since the very beginning, since the drainage problem showed up on Barragata Heights because a new road had been plowed that went from Route 16 to up Barragata Heights, and I characterized it as going from Route 16 to a Pandora's box of problems, cronyism and corruption. So I followed it very carefully. I saw the introduction of a bill in May that would have solved all of the Chamorro Land Trust problems if it had been passed into law. I saw Tom Atta ignore that. I saw it noticed up for public hearing on July 13. I saw Tom Atta cancel that hearing. Then Tom Atta introduced his own bill that I refer to as the sweep it under the rug bill. And I'm going to come back and pick up on Bob versus Tom Atta's committee here right after this big halftime show that's coming up at 5 o'clock.
point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Praising an immigrant cop. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. The manhunt goes on in Northern California for the killer who gunned down a Newman police officer this week. Officer Ronil Singh was an immigrant from Fiji.
Officer Singh is the shining example of what immigration in America should be. This is a young man who immigrated here legally. It was his dream to come to America. It was his dream to be a police officer, and he worked hard to achieve that goal. And unfortunately, he sacrificed his life trying to defend and protect his community.
Stanislaus County Sheriff Adam Christensen says Singh was fatally shot, ironically, by an illegal immigrant. An 8-year-old Guatemalan boy who died in U.S. custody this week had the flu. However, New Mexico's medical investigator says more tests need to be done to determine the exact cause of death for Felipe Gomez Alonso. He's the second migrant child to die in custody this month. Congress is back from the Christmas break, but the House and Senate simply gavelled in and gavelled out without taking any action to solve the partial government shutdown.
Everybody right now thinks that this government shutdown is going to run through the new Congress when Democrats take control a week from today. Now, Sarah Sanders, the White House spokesperson, put out a statement putting the blame on Democrats, saying that the president stayed in Washington over Christmas ready to work, and they have still not gone back and talked about the offers that the administration made several days ago. Well, a spokesman for Nancy Pelosi, the incoming Speaker of the House, Drew Hamill, shot back. Democrats have offered Republicans 3 options to reopen the government that include funding for strong, sensible, and effective border security, but not the president's immoral and effective and expensive border wall.
Fox's Chad Program on Capitol Hill. President Trump tweeting Thursday, do the Dems realize that most of the people not getting paid are Democrats? This is Fox News.
Introducing Exchanged, Guam's first online and mobile remittance to the Philippines. Exchanged is the easiest and fastest way to send money to your family and friends anywhere in the Philippines. Download the Exchanged app or visit their website, exchanged.me. Sign up, remit, and get a chance to win a trip for 2 to Manila. Deluxe accommodations at the Belmont Hotel at Resorts World Manila. So sign up and remit now at Exchanged. Promo ends March 2nd, 2019. Conditions apply. Also avail of Exchange dollar to remit promo. Visit exchange.me for details.
Hafa Tritons. This is Tito Castro, proud alumnus of the University of Guam class of 2015 and president of the UOG Alumni Association. As a working Triton and first-generation college student, I know the value of a university education and call upon my fellow alumni, parents, and friends to make that education affordable and accessible to all during this year's G is Forgiving campaign. To make a tax-deductible donation, log on to supportuog.org by December 31st or call 735-2957 for more information.
Viva UOG!
A blizzard hits the Midwest, dumping heavy snow to areas of Minnesota and the Dakotas and whipping up some strong winds. That bad weather is expected to head east next and arrive in New York and New England by Friday, just in time for the new year. Volatility still rules on Wall Street. Stocks staged a last-minute turnaround Thursday to put the market on track to end the roller coaster week with a gain.
Traders shouting their excitement as the market moved from the red down as much as 611 points into the green late in the afternoon. Option buying sending shares higher, and Apple, which had been the Dow's worst performing stock, trimming its losses to just 0.5%. The markets have a long way to go before turning around their performance for the year. The Dow still down 6.3% for the year, with only the healthcare sector in positive territory.
Fox Business Network's Jerry Willis. The Dow ended with a 260-point gain. The Nasdaq rose 25. The Boston bomber wants his conviction tossed out.
Boston Marathon bomber Johar Tsarnaev hopes an appeals court will toss his convictions or death sentence. His attorneys on Thursday filing documents saying the judge's refusal to move the trial out of Boston made it impossible for Tsarnaev to get a fair trial. The 500-page brief includes other alleged problems with the 2015 trial, including juror misconduct. Johar had admitted he and his older brother carried out the 2011 bombings at the marathon's finish line, killing 3 and injuring 260 others. Tsarnaev was convicted on more than 30 charges. His brother Tamerlan was killed in a gun battle with police. Rich Dennison, Fox News.
And the Christmas message by Britain's Queen Elizabeth sparks a social media backlash. Politicians and others criticizing her for urging togetherness while she sits in front of a hugely expensive glitzy gold piano that most people could never afford. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
For over 30 years, Sanford Technology Group has been helping companies throughout Guam and Micronesia with their payroll, time and attendance, networking, and other information technology services. Our online integrated payroll and time and attendance solution provides the workforce management tools and expertise to make your business more efficient and employee-friendly. For more information, visit Sanford Technology at 335 South Marine Corps Drive or call us at 647-0220 to schedule a demo today.
Cheers to 80 years. It's our 80th anniversary and the gifts are on us. 80 gift certificates, 8 shopping sprees, 8 staycations, and 1 round-trip flyaway for 2 to Manila. So how do you enter? Calvo's Insurance personal home and auto customers are automatically entered. Non-Calvo's customers may enter by receiving a qualified quote. It's our way of saying thank you for trusting us for the past 80 years. For more details, visit calvos.com/giveaway or call 472-6816. Calvo's Insurance, serving Guam for 80 years.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
So here we are, back from that big halftime show that we have every day at 5 o'clock. It's always exciting. And I left off talking about Tom Atta's land committee meeting this morning at 9 o'clock, which I thought would consist only of a briefing for anyone who was there on several topics. Well, I listened to that, and then after that, Tom Atta actually took testimony. And I was sitting out there in the peanut gallery, and when he opened the floor up for testimony, I couldn't resist. So, you know, Real Joe Cruz, I hate to talk about myself.
But this is about you, Bob.
Yeah, as Rush Limbaugh would say, I hate to talk about myself, but this time I have to, because this is about me. So, but I'm going to go through this article first, and then when I get finished with that, then I will summarize the testimony, not only mine, but others. And this is how the article reads. And this is from the Daily News online edition, reflecting on this morning's hearing. So they're really fast on this. The current legislature won't have enough time to make changes to Chamorro Land Trust rules and regulations and will need to pass it to the next one. Well, they won't have time because Tom Atta has sat on this since last May. That's the reason they won't have enough time. And getting ahead of myself a little bit, I had to point out to Tom Atta this morning that there are no rules and regulations for the Chamorro Land Trust Act. There are none. And Tom Atta said to me, well, what about Public Law 23-28? What's that? And my answer was, that's a black hole. Because if you look at 23-28, which is a public law, there's some words in there that are set out, but they're not set out in ordinary statutory form, even though 23-28, like every public law, is a statute. So because the words set out in there are not set out as part of the Guam Code annotated, you can't find those provisions with ordinary statutory research tools. And because 2328 is a statute, not a rule, you won't find it in the Guam administrative rules maintained by the compiler of laws because it's not a rule. So it's a black hole. The only way that you would know about the provisions that are in 2328 would be if someone told you about it. So we're all the way back to oral tradition. And I guess I'll get a little bit more ahead of myself. Had Public Law 284-34 been passed, then the temporary receiver required by that bill would have had to promulgate the rules and regulations that were never promulgated after the Chamorro Land Trust Act passed. And that's part of the reason that there's such a big mess. But this first sentence, the current legislature wouldn't have enough time to make changes. If you don't start on something, you'll never have enough time to finish it. And that's exactly what happened here. During an informational hearing at the legislature Friday, Senator Tom Atta's chief of staff, Joe Borah, went over recommendations that the 35th legislature can make for the Chamorro Land Trust. Borah said the current legislature doesn't have enough time to make any changes, but wanted to get things on the record to help the next legislature. The kind of stuff that is going on this record here, as you'll see later on, is the kind of help that the next legislature would need, kind of like a drowning man would appreciate it if you threw him an anvil to help him stay afloat. Borah discussed Bill 356-34, which would authorize the Chamorro Land Trust Commission validation of 2,877 residential and agricultural leases which were categorized as voidable but subsequently ratified by the Commission, and 102 leases which were determined null and void due to improperly allowing applicants to switch places on the waiting list. The ratification of the leases and the changes to the rules and regulations were something the CLTC wanted to get done this legislative term, but not very bad, because the Chamorro Land Trust Commission did nothing up until late August when they announced that they had conducted their own investigation and found out that there had been no wrongdoing. The other leases needed to be approved through the legislature because switching places is not allowed through the current law. Borah said his review of switching places was that many were done through family members. Well, that makes it okay, I guess. And it was done for rational and compassionate reasons, which are consistent with Chamorro ideals. Now, that's an interesting approach to making laws. So you could do something wrong. You can violate the rules so long as while you're doing it, it's compassionate and within Chamorro ideals. I don't think that's part of Chamorro ideals. He said the legislature should move forward to allow the switches. And I've commented on this before. We see this all the time. Somebody or some buddies do something wrong, and instead of blowing the whistle on someone who does something wrong, we incorporate what they did into the law and make that right. Classic example, these digital signs that were granted variances which the Land Use Commission didn't have the power to provide. So how do we fix it? Do we shut down the signs that should have never been there in the first place? No. We allow the ones that were illegally put up to stay, and then we pass a law to allow for more of those same ugly signs. Bora said Bill 356-34 as amended could be used in the 35th legislature to move the issue forward. I certainly hope not. That's the sweep it under the rug bill. As amended, the bill would ratify the 102 leases and amend the rules to allow a one-time switch between applicants. It would also allow a life estate for an unqualified surviving spouse. Now, let me explain that. This is what a life estate is. Let's talk about A and B. Let's say that A owns Blackacre, and he wants to deed Blackacre to B. So standard conveyancing language would be from A to B in fee simple. Now, if A wanted to live on Blackacre for the rest of his life and then have it go to B, it would be from A to B, reserving a life estate in A. That means that A stays on Blackacre and is the owner of Blackacre until he dies, and then it zips, the title zips over to B. That's a life estate. So had there been such a provision back in the days of Reverend Gibson, the lease with his wife could have reserved a life estate in Reverend Gibson, since he wasn't qualified for the estate himself, for the lease himself. So that would have meant that when Reverend Gibson's wife died, he could have stayed on the leasehold until he died himself, and then the leasehold goes back to the Chamorro Land Trust. I suppose that makes a certain amount of sense. It has a certain humanitarian dimension, and it also would encourage the development of Chamorro Land Trust land. Addis has said it is inherently unfair with the current law because when an eligible applicant is married to a non-Chamorro but then dies and they don't have any children, they are left with nothing. It's too many theys there to figure out what he's talking about, but I think we know it's a classic case of Reverend Gibson. A copy of the amended bill, the committee reports for the informational hearing, and the public hearing will be part of a packet that will be on record so the next legislature can work on the changes. Now, there were several people there that testified about how dissatisfied they were with the Chamorro Land Trust. People that, had gone down and signed up back in 1995 can get nothing out of the employees of the Chamorro Land Trust. They don't know if they'll ever get a piece of real property, et cetera. They said it didn't make them real happy sitting here listening to making these provisions for people who had switched when they'd never gotten their land in the first place. So I couldn't resist. I had to sit down and testify myself. And my testimony was that I wasn't there to petition for an individual cause like everybody else was. I was there only for the stated purpose. If the committee was going to make a record, I wanted something to be part of the record. And what I wanted to be part of the record was that anyone in the 35th Guam legislature who wants to deal with the Chamorro Land Trust Commission should take a long, hard look at Bill 284-34. And that's the one that Tom Atta wouldn't even bring on for public hearing. And that's the one that would have, had it been enacted in May, we wouldn't be having this conversation today, because that one created a moratorium on any more activity by the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. It took Mike Bora completely out of the picture. It would have allowed the governor to appoint a retired judge from Guam or the CNMI to come in as a temporary receiver with all of the authority of the director of land management to sort out that mess. And his tenure would last until 90 days after the rules and regulations were promulgated that should have been promulgated at the time the act was passed, but never were. I thought this was an excellent idea. The Chamorro Land Trust Commission right now has zero credibility. Nobody trusts it. It seems to be unable to do anything right. Last week, the story in the paper that they gave a lease to somebody who'd been living on the land for 30 years. We don't know why, but, well, the poor guy has been living on the land without a lease and can't give power. Solution, well, let's give him a lease. And then there was the Reverend Gibson matter that came up. And it's just one defalcation after another. The unkindest cut of all was when the Land Trust Commission came forward and said, we did our investigation and nobody did anything wrong. It's just amazing. So in order for that Land Trust Commission to ever have any credibility, there has to be someone go in and straighten it out, someone who has no connection with the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, someone who is not connected with the current political power structure, someone who knows the law, someone who's respected. How about a retired judge for 4 or 5 months to go in there and straighten it out? One of the witnesses, Robert Celestial, drew an analogy. Robert Celestial is one of those people who was the beneficiary of a swap in line. He swapped places with his cousin, and he had a heartwarming story. He swapped places with his cousin. He got on the land. He did what he was supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. Had no inkling that the Chamorro Land Trust employee that arranged this swap didn't know what the heck he was doing and did something wrong. So, Robert's saying, well, here we are now. That's where we live. What's going to happen to us? And that's why we need the judge to go in there and straighten all this stuff out. But anyhow, when Robert made his explanation, he said, he said this to the chairman. He said, if a car has a flat tire and you leave it by the road for a few days, you come back and it's trashed. The windshield will be broken and the parts will be stolen and on and on and on and on. And he says, as far as the Chamorro Land Trust is concerned, he says, it's time to fix that tire so that the car isn't wrecked. And when it was my turn, I picked up on that analogy, and I said, Robert makes a good point, but we're way past fixing the tire. That car has been on the side of the road for so long, it's completely wrecked. And just coming along and painting it up a little bit is not going to make it work very well in the future. That's the Chamorro Land Trust, and that's what this Bill 356 would do. A paint job, maybe make it look okay on the outside, but it's not going to fix the structural problems. So that was my request, that a record be made of at least one citizen coming forward saying that you ought to enact Bill 284-34, or those provisions in the 35th, if you're really serious about cleaning up the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. So I'll be watching that like a hawk in the 35th Guam Legislature. There's a couple of things I'm going to be watching very carefully. That's one of them. Another would be to reform the rules for roll call voting so we can do away with this silly system of card coning voting or roll call musical chairs that I've described a couple of times. So if you're a new senator, you're just coming in, you want to make a name for yourself, do that. Introduce Bill 284. Repeal the recent tax increase. This is how you'll get yourself off to a good start. If you are a incoming senator and you're thinking, well, it's going to take me a while to learn the ropes, no. There's no such thing as a new senator. You're expected to hit the ground running and know exactly what you're doing from the very first day, because that's what you wanted people to think when you were out there running for office. When you were out there running for office, you didn't fumble around and say, well, you know, give me a chance and maybe 6 months down the road I'll figure out what it is to be a senator and maybe I'll do some good stuff. It's not how it works. I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday, but I think my cough is getting better. It ought to be getting better because I've been practicing a lot lately. Right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir. It's getting a lot better.
All right. Okay, next item on the card here is Senator Fernando Esteves versus the Attorney General of Guam, Elizabeth Barrett Anderson. And it goes like this. Senator Fernando Esteves is accusing the Office of the Attorney General of being selective in responding to requests for legal opinions. I wonder if he's accusing the office or the Attorney General. The senator sent a letter to Attorney General Anderson on Thursday regarding a request for an opinion on the U.S. Supreme Court case Dakota versus Wayfair. Now, here's a quote. This rendered the previously held nexus requirement void, allowing states to apply their local taxes to online purchases regardless of physical presence. I'll read it again. Quote, this rendered the previously held nexus requirement void, allowing states to apply their local taxes to online purchases regardless of physical presence. Well, if the question was worded as clearly as that sentence, I could understand why the Attorney General didn't answer. Here's what Senator Esteves is trying to say. He's trying to say that the case Dakota versus Wayfair changed the law for the application of sales tax. Before Dakota came along, in order for a state to assess a sales tax on a mail order purchase, the seller would have had to have had a physical presence in the taxing state. Okay, so let's take Amazon. Let's say Amazon is located only in Washington State, and someone from Wisconsin buys something from Amazon. Wisconsin cannot apply a sales tax to that mail order sale from Amazon because Amazon does not have a physical presence in Wisconsin. If Wisconsin did have, if there were a physical presence in Wisconsin, then the sales tax could be collected. That's the old rule. It's the old case buffs would remember that as International Shoe versus Washington, a case that was on the books for a long time. And when Amazon came along, this Dakota case changed the law and said that states now have the ability to levy a tax on mail order sales even if the seller does not have a physical presence in the buyer's jurisdiction. So that's what Fernando is trying to say here. And then he goes on to say, as it stands, our people, I never know who this our people is. Do you, Real Joe Cruz?
I'm not sure, sir.
Yeah. Our people pay potentially millions in applicable taxes to other states for their online purchases. I don't know how that would happen. Furthermore, our taxable rate of 4% under the use tax law could save our consumers much higher sales tax rates in other states. This makes about as much sense as the first sentence. I don't follow it. If we were to apply the rule in Dakota, what it would mean is that, and I don't see why we couldn't right now, we could levy our use tax on any mail order mail order shipment received by a citizen of Guam. And we used to do that. You younger fellas wouldn't remember this, but there was a time when we first added the use tax. If you got a package at the Agania post office, which is where everybody got his packages, the post office would call someone from customs, and a lady would come over. You would be given the package. You'd open it in front of her, and she would assess that use tax right on the spot. The use tax was 4%, but I think that turned out to be too cumbersome. So here we go with a seventh inning stretch, and I'm proud to say that the real Joe Cruz and the Yogi Berra Show are back today.
Whether you love history, nature, scenery, or good food, Jeff's Pirates Cove is the place to be. Originally established as Pirates Cove in 1953, it's the oldest remaining beach bar and restaurant in Guam. Located on Guam's rugged southeast coast, visitors for years have discovered the natural beauty wrapped in deep history. Come out and walk the entire 22-acre site. Stop by the Seaside Museum for a taste of local history and experience Jose's international menu with open-air dining. Stop by and see what you've been missing. Jeff's Pirates Cove in historic Ipan Talafofo.
What are the benefits of switching to the handset payment option with GTA? For starters, you can customize a plan that matches your budget and lowers your monthly payment. HPO lets you upgrade to the latest phones whenever you want. No more waiting for a contract to end to get that slimmer, faster smartphone. Because with HPO, there are no contracts. HPO lets you design a phone plan that suits you. So join the thousands who have already switched to HPO, the most customizable phone plan on island. Limited time offer. Terms and conditions apply.
Jeff's Pirates Cove, open daily at 8 a.m., serving up hot breakfast with endless coffee and a taste of history.
So here we are back again in the center field bleachers at Wrigley Field, and the real Joe Cruz, who is broadening his range, working on a routine called A Night with Yogi Berra, which will someday go national, I'm sure. I strike up a chat with the Yogi impersonator here out in the bleachers, and he comes back with one of Yogi's famous lines. So, hey, Yogi, how's it going?
It's going good.
Yogi, didn't you used to play for the Mets back in the day?
Yep, we were overwhelming underdogs.
Well, thank you, Yogi. Overwhelming underdogs. Okay. So much for Yogi Berra. Okay, I was talking about Senator Esteves and Dakota versus Wayfair. And I mentioned that there was a time when the 4% use tax was assessed on any incoming package. I think it got to be too cumbersome, so a pretty hefty exemption was put in place. It's something, I don't know if it's $400 or $500 or something like that. But when you come in, when you arrive at the airport, when you fill out that form, that's the purpose of that form and the purpose of her inspecting your bag. So if you're bringing back $250,000 worth of gold in your suitcase, you're going to have to pay a 4% tax on that on that stuff. So Estevez here is saying that, I don't know, the sentence is really hard to understand. Our taxable rate of 4% under the use tax law would save our consumers from much higher sales tax rates in other states. I don't understand how that would work. Okay, then going on to the Attorney General. The Senator said he requested the opinion 6 months ago and intended to use the Attorney General's feedback during the budget discussions for fiscal 2019. After repeated follow-ups of professional courtesy, my office has not received any actionable feedback or any updates on the case review. I would be remiss if I failed to point out that it has been observed by not only myself that your office is selective in its responsiveness to our requests, the senator stated. The law, Estevez added, required the Attorney General to answer his request and dictated that opinions not rendered within 7 days become the personal liability of the Attorney General. Estevez requested all documents related to his request for a legal opinion and all operating procedures related to processing a request for a legal opinion. In conclusion, I implore you, Honorable Attorney General Elizabeth Barrett Anderson, to take this matter to heart, Estevez wrote. Our government has raised taxes on our people. Meanwhile, we are potentially paying millions to the benefit of other states. Based on what has transpired, I cannot remain silent or meek as it relates to our people, and once again apologize for being left with this approach. I don't know. It's an awful lot of words used to say very, very little, and something along the lines of Attorney General. I asked for an opinion 6 months ago, and I haven't received it. Can you give it to me now? Probably would have worked just as well. But there's something else here that I think needs to be examined a little bit, and that is that the Attorney General is a member of the executive branch. Senator Estevez is a member of the legislative branch. And as a general principle, members of the legislative branch are not in a position to govern the activity of members of the executive branch. Now, up until, 2002, the Attorney General was appointed by the governor and was part of the governor's cabinet. In 2002, we started electing the Attorney General. The Attorney General has a couple of jobs, one of which is to be general counsel for the entire executive branch for the government of Guam. That's one of the Attorney General's jobs. A second job of the Attorney General is to prosecute all criminal offenses against the territory of Guam. Attorney General also has all of the common law powers of an Attorney General. But it's not really the Attorney General's job to give legal advice to another co-equal branch of the government. It's not the Attorney General's job to give legal advice to, say, a judge in the Superior Court. Superior Court has its own lawyers. It's not the Attorney General's job to give legal advice to senators in the legislature. The legislature has its own lawyers called legislative counsel. So if you wanted to do something with this, with the rule in Dakota versus Wayfair, Senator Estevez, the place to start would have been with your own legislative counsel. Have him draft a bill for you. Have him give you an opinion, whatever. For once, I'm going to stick up for the Attorney General here. I don't think that it stands us in very good shape when members of the legislature think that they can make demands on the work time of the Attorney General. Now, if you want to beat up on the Attorney General because something that should have been prosecuted wasn't, or something that was shouldn't have been, that's fine. But Senator Davis, you're not in a position where you can control the time and work product of the Attorney General. And to me, you make a fool out of yourself when you write stuff like you wrote today dealing with Dakota versus Wayfair. I would hope, I suspect it's not going to happen, but I would hope that the next Attorney General comes along and says, I am not going to give you guys any legal advice on your bills. In addition to everything else, it tends to compromise the independence of the Attorney General. If Bill A is if a bill is pending before the legislature and the Attorney General gives an opinion on it, the bill passes into law, and the constitutionality of the law that results from that bill is challenged, where does that put the Attorney General? Because the Attorney General has a duty to defend the laws of Guam, but the Attorney General also has the ability to seek the declaration of unconstitutionality of unconstitutional bills. So the whole system would work a whole lot better if the legislature did the lawmaking on its own without any help, assistance, or interference whatsoever from the Attorney General, and the Attorney General's opinions be reserved for questions arising in the executive branch of the government. So, not so hot here, Fernando Esteves. Let's see. I think it's probably time that I say hello to those hardy souls that made it back today. Real Joe Cruz.
Yes, sir.
You've got that clever little tune that you play, remember?
Yes, sir. Here it comes.
Welcome back.
So I got Carl T.C. Gutierrez, former Governor Gutierrez. Happy New Year, Bob. Great show always. Thank you very much for the kind words, Governor, and Happy New Year to you and to Jerry. And Brad, of course, is locked and loaded. And Chris Chip, Happy New Year to all of our friends while we are off island. So Chris Chip, even though he's off island, is still a member of Tall Tales Nation. Good deal. And Brad has a long message here. Build the wall. The police in California's Central Valley are hunting for a man who they believe killed a police officer and is in the country illegally. According to authorities, the shooting occurred around 1 a.m. Wednesday when Ranil Singh, a 33-year-old officer, was gunned down after pulling over a driver he suspected was drunk in East Newman, California, a town of about 10,000, not far from Modesto. The case was soon thrust into the nation's fractious debate over immigration when President Trump tweeted about it yesterday afternoon. Build a wall. And Juanita Machi says, Happy New Year, Bob, and the real Joe Cruz. Nice of Juanita. Thank you, Juanita. I'm sure the real Joe Cruz appreciates it too, don't you, real Joe?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Shelley Gibson, Happy New Year to you and Auntie Lou, Mr. Klitzkie, and real Joe Cruz.
Well, thank you.
Boy, you're developing a fan base here, real Joe Cruz. And Don Ed Kilani, emergency. Someone get that man some cough syrup and kadun manuk. Or Kadupika, if you prefer. Brad Hokinson, Happy New Year, Mr. Klitzkie. Happy New Year to you, Brad. Ryan San Nicholas, Happy New Year to you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan.
Our friend
Appreciate
Ryan,
that.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. And Next item on the card is the United Nations versus the United States Navy. And this is a piece by Sophia Paris of The Variety, who's a feature writer for The Variety. And I want you to be careful, pay careful attention to the impression that this piece creates, whether it's intentional or not. Saipan, byline Saipan, or dateline Saipan. During its 48th plenary meeting on December 7, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a new resolution that, quote, reaffirms the need to avoid any economic or other activities, including the use of the non-self-governing territories for military activity that adversely affect the interests of the peoples of the non-self-governing territories. The peoples of the non-self-governing territories. The UN passed Resolution 73/104, economic and other activities which affect the peoples of the non-self-governing territories, to remind administering powers of their responsibility and accountability vis-a-vis any detriment to the interest of the peoples of those territories in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the United Nations on decolonization. Wow. That's probably the kindest thing I could say about the United Nations. Good thing I got a cough today. The resolution states any economic or other activity, including the use of non-self-governing territories for military activity that has a negative impact on the interests of the people of the non-self-governing territories and on the exercise of the right to self-determination, is contrary to the purposes and principles of the Charter. Okay, so that's something that apparently comes from perhaps a press release from the United Nations General Assembly. And then the next paragraph says this. Now, there's no attribution for this next paragraph. It's just there. This appears to conflict with the U.S. Navy's plans to carry out a military buildup on Guam, which remains an unincorporated territory where the general population cannot vote for president and lacks representation by a voting delegate in Congress. I just asked myself, well, where did this come from? Is this a comment from a UN official? Is it a comment made by someone on Guam? Or is this just Sophia Paris thinking, well, I really should probably put this in here because it's a point that I think is important and ought to be made. Okay, Sophia goes on to say, or Sophia says, this appears to conflict with the U.S. Navy's plans to carry out a military buildup on Guam, which remains an unincorporated territory where the general population cannot vote for president and lacks representation. We're right on down here at the home stretch. Well, I'll finish up with Sophia here between now and the end of the show.
Because I just signed up for a 12-month iConnect plan, I'm automatically entered into iConnect's Connect and Win giveaway. iConnect is giving away a trip for two to Manila with a stay at the new Holiday Inn Express. They'll also be giving away an Apple Watch, Apple TV, more Mabuhay miles, Fitbits, and Beyond the Box gift cards. Go to iConnectGuam.com for details or call 888-8888 to learn how you can connect and win with iConnect.
Conditions apply.
It's Micronesia Mall's 30th anniversary, and to celebrate, we are giving away a new Kia Soul LX, a Mazda 3i Sport, the popular Honda Civic LX, and 30 Manila Flyaways during our 30th anniversary Drive-Away Flyaway. Win 3 great cars from Triple J Auto Group, 30 Flyaways from Philippine Airlines, plus thousands of prizes from Burger King and Foot Locker when you play Micronesia Mall's 30th anniversary Drive-Away Flyaway.
So here we are back again. I've got some questions here. Don Ed Kalani, if it's Aunt Lou, does that make it Uncle Bob Klitzkie? Yeah, for some folks it does. And dyan untungo na i kastombrin sumoro dyan kin amko itauto na elect niya Tiu Bob. Isn't that how it works, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of folks call us Uncle Bob and Aunt Lou. And I'll tell you what, I've been called a whole lot worse than that. But and then we've got Elmore Mo Cotton, who says, listening from my car radio. Well, caution there, Bo. Make sure you put a cloth over the speaker on your radio, because I sometimes cough into the microphone here. And Mo says, take care of that cold over the weekend. Looking forward to hearing you on Monday. I look forward to being here on Monday, too. But I'll tell you what, I'll come in on Monday, but I'm not coming back in here anymore this year. I don't care what anybody says. And then Albert Eliasson says, get well, Marine. Want to make sure you're around a lot longer. Well, I'll concur with that one. Thank you, Albert, and Semper Fi. So going back to this article here, UN versus the USN. Maybe it's Sophia Paris versus the USN. Because after what appears to be a press release from the United Nations on their resolution 73/104, which is the same old typical stuff from the United Nations, then we have this paragraph that is not attributed to anyone. This appears to conflict with the U.S. Navy's plans to carry out a military buildup on Guam, which remains an unincorporated territory where the general population cannot vote for president and lacks representation by a voting delegate in Congress. Guam-based activists have been protesting the Navy's plans on the grounds that they would destroy cultural heritage areas and old-growth forests. Very interesting how that paragraph got in there like that. Then the article goes on to say the General Assembly, which acts as the main deliberative, policymaking, and representative organ of the UN, adopted the measure reaffirming further that the natural resources are the heritage of the peoples of the non-self-governing territories, including the indigenous populations, and stating its concern about any activities aimed at the exploitation of the natural resources that are the heritage of the peoples of the non-self-governing territories. The resolution calls for governments to ensure that the exploitation of the marine and other natural resources in the non-self-governing territories under their administration is not in violation of the relevant resolutions of the United Nations and does not adversely affect the interests of the people of those territories. If governments find that exploitation is occurring, the UN calls upon them to take legislative, administrative and other measures to put an end to such activities. You know, this is a recurring theme. The bureaucrats of the UN, prompted primarily by people that see the United Nations as a good foil for countries that are opposed to the interests of the United States, to beat up on the United States, aided and assisted by the sneaking in of paragraphs like the one I just mentioned. And when it's all done, I think that there's a suspicion, or that there's an expectation on the part of the Sophia Parises of the world that anyone who reads this will take it seriously. Now, after all that, here's Sophia's punchline. Whether the UN's resolution will prompt any response whatsoever from the U.S. government remains to be seen. Now, are we looking at some pretty heavy-duty editorialization here? Whatever happened to the facts, ma'am? Just the facts. So I think that if Sophia wants to write editorials, it would be a real good idea if she talks to her editor about putting the stuff that she writes on the editorial page and not pass it off as news. Well, let me see what, let's see, we've got a couple of Carls on board today. We've got the Carl, and we also have our Carl. Our Carl has been with us all this time. So what can you tell me about Sophia Paris, our Carl?
I just wanted to chime in. I was listening to you on the way home in traffic, and I was jumping out of my skin. You know, one thing that bothers me about the UN, this fourth committee on decolonization, they are so focused on places like, you know, Guam and Saipan and, you know, things like that, and they completely ignore the tragedy that happened in 1950 in the invasion by China of Tibet. Over 400,000 to, I think it's like 800,000 people estimated slaughtered. Their Buddhist temples, I think that they went from over a couple of hundred or, you know, several hundred down to just, you know, single digit. And the UN doesn't talk anything about that, you know. So you know, if they really want to be serious about this, they really need to have someone come to the front of the UN Assembly and say, free Tibet. Let's be serious. You know, if this is really that important, that's one of the worst cases of colonization in history. Mass slaughter of the Tibetans. The Dalai Lama is still not allowed to come home. He is in exile. He's been in exile for decades. You know, this all rings hollow to me.
Well, you're absolutely right about Tibet. I've had the good fortune of visiting Tibet a couple of times, real Carl, and it's an enchanting place. But if you can, it would be good to go there now because it's quickly disappearing. It is being Sinoized as we speak. Probably in a couple dozen more years, Tibet will be just like the rest of China because the Chinese seem to be doing everything that they can to make Tibet just another part of China and take away its character, its culture, its religion. Obviously, you spoke about the Dalai Lama. He's long gone. And if you're really concerned about culture and cultural preservation and all those sorts of things, you'll have a hard time finding a worse abuse than China, which is one of the countries on the fourth committee. And of course, Sabrina didn't tell us any of the mechanics of this UN resolution, but it wouldn't surprise me if China were one of the sponsors of that resolution at the United Nations. But it's okay. It's all right because that's China, you know, and they're cool. And anytime that the people can beat up on the United States, well, let's give it a shot, right, Carl?
Yeah, and I'm glad you allowed me to get a word in here because I was really, weaving through traffic because I was coming out of my skin. I was so irritated by that whole thing and total silence on this, one of the worst slaughters. They are destroying the Tibetan culture, completely destroying. They've killed over 400,000 people, and total silence by the UN.
Well, thanks for calling in, Carl, and you got in just under the wire here. We're listening to Ravel's Bolero, so I'll see you on Monday, okay?
Okay, as usual, great show.
Thank you. Okay, so much for the United Nations. I like to end the show on a high note if I can, and that certainly is not the United Nations. But we take the news as it comes. See you next Monday.